Imagine for a second, what would happen if the geographical center of, one of the world's absolute largest belief systems was suddenly argued to be a complete illusion?
Wow. Yeah. That is a massive thought.
Right. I want you to really try to picture this. We are talking about a place that is visited by millions of people every single year.
Literally millions.
Exactly. A location that generates billions upon billions of dollars in revenue, driving entire economies.
Yeah, it's a huge industry.
It dictates the daily, physical orientation of a massive portion of the global population. And then someone comes along and presents this meticulously researched thesis claiming that this center, this anchor of reality for so many people is actually an epic historical and geographical misdirection.
I mean, it would be a paradigm shift of almost unimaginable proportions. You are talking about completely upending a foundational reality.
Absolutely.
When you tell people that the compass they have been using for, centuries is broken, and not just broken, but intentionally pointing to a mirage, you are challenging the very architecture of their worldview.
Yeah. It is the kind of claim that just, it shakes the ground under your feet.
That is the perfect way to describe it, because that shaking ground is the explicit premise of today's deep dive. We are unpacking a highly provocative, deeply unconventional thesis authored by Dr. Khaled Waleed.
Right, and it's a heavy text.
It really is. The text we are diving into is titled Deaf, Dumb, and Blind, The Desert Delusion, and Dr. Waleed's mission in this sprawling text is to radically reinterpret Islamic geography and scripture from the ground up.
Completely from scratch, yeah.
He is making the case that the true center of worship, like the absolute focal point of divine revelation, is not Mecca in the desert, but rather what he specifically terms the Baka of Jerusalem in Palestine.
So before we delve into the nuts and bolts of how he builds this case, we really need to establish the ground rules for our discussion today.
No, definitely we have to do that. Because the original text we are analyzing today deals with intensely charged religious, historical, and geopolitical claims.
They're very charged.
Right. Because of the sheer magnitude of what Dr. Waleed is arguing, it is just vital that we clarify our role here. We are not theologians, we are not judges,
Nope.
And we are certainly not here to validate or debunk his thesis. We are acting entirely as impartial cartographers.
I like that, impartial cartographers.
Yeah, we are just going to map out Dr. Waleed's arguments, dissect his analogies, and sort of trace his specific scriptural interpretations exactly as he presents them in his text.
Right. We are just the tour guides for his specific intellectual architecture. We aren't taking sides. We aren't endorsing these views. And we are not going to drag in outside theological context or traditional counter-arguments to debate him.
Exactly. That's not the point of this.
Our sole purpose is to help you, the listener, understand the inner workings of Dr. Waleed's research. We are examining the blueprints he has drawn up, analyzing how the load-bearing walls of his argument are constructed, and looking at the foundation he claims to have uncovered.
That really is the only way to genuinely understand a text this disruptive. You have to step entirely inside its framework and observe the logic from within.
Yeah, you have to play by its rules for a minute.
Right. And to do that, to understand his rereading of Scripture, we first have to understand the physical, tangible map that Dr. Waleed is drawing for his readers. He starts by completely redefining the physical spaces in question.
So let's start there. Let's look at the physical map. Where exactly does he claim this true center is located? And how does he categorize the current one that the world universally recognizes?
Well, Dr. Waleed's entire thesis rests on a very sharp, almost brutal contrast between two specific geographic locations. On one side, you have the current focal point located in the desert, which he frequently refers to as Mecca of the desert. And he does not mince words when describing this space.
No, he really doesn't.
He categorically defines this location as a human-made artificial house.
Mm-hmm.
But he takes it a step further. He calls it an epistemological idol.
Wait, an epistemological idol. I want to pause on that for a second because it is such a dense phrase, but it seems completely central to his argument.
It's the core of it, yeah.
Because epistemology is the study of knowledge, right? It's how we know, what constitutes truth.
Exactly.
So when he says epistemological idol, he isn't just talking about a golden calf or a stone statue. He's talking about an idol built out of false knowledge.
Right, a conceptual idol.
He is arguing that the very foundation of what people think they know is idolized, even though it's manufactured.
That is a phenomenal way to break it down. Dr. Waleed is arguing that the desert center functions as an idol because people have placed their ultimate trust and really their foundational understanding of truth into a human construct.
It dictates their whole knowledge system.
Yes. If your compass is pointing to an artificial north, then every map you draw based on that compass is fundamentally flawed.
Wow, yeah.
And he asserts that the center in the desert was deliberately constructed and continues to be maintained to exploit what he vividly terms the dizziness of ignorance, or déchet.
The dizziness of ignorance. That paints such a specific picture.
It really does.
It implies that people aren't just confused, right? They are actively caught in a cycle, quite literally spinning around a point, completely unaware that the point itself is arbitrary.
Spinning in circles, yeah.
And he doesn't just keep this in the realm of philosophy.
No.
He levels a very sharp, very modern economic critique at this desert location, doesn't he?
He does, and the economic critique is a massive pillar of his argument. Dr. Waleed points out the sheer scale of wealth required to maintain this center.
The numbers are staggering.
They are. He argues that this artificial house was built with immense hidden wealth and continues to generate billions of dollars annually from the millions of masses who travel to visit it.
Right.
He specifically highlights that the profits generated from this geographical focal point actually surpass traditional economic drivers like, oil revenues.
Which is wild to think about.
Exactly. For Dr. Waleed, this money isn't a sign of divine blessing. To him, it is the ultimate proof of human engineering. It is a corporate enterprise masquerading as a divine mandate.
So if you are listening to this and trying to wrap your head around the goal of his claim, let's try a quick analogy.
Sure.
Dr. Waleed is essentially arguing that it is as if a group of people went into the middle of a barren desert, built a massive, highly lucrative, spectacular replica of the North Pole, and then somehow managed to convince the entire global population to recalibrate their compasses to this new artificial point. And on top of that, they are charging admission, building luxury hotels around it, and running a multi-billion-dollar industry based on the fact that everyone is walking in the wrong direction.
That analogy captures the mechanics of his argument perfectly. He views the current center as a manufactured illusion, a desert delusion that requires constant, massive financial investment, continuous construction, and overwhelming spectacle just to maintain its aura of sanctity.
Right, because it can't stand on its own.
Exactly. It is an industry. Now, you have to contrast that heavily manufactured image with where Dr. Waleed points his own compass, which is the Baqqa of Jerusalem in Palestine.
Right. So how does he define Baqqa of Jerusalem? Because if the desert is this glittering, expensive, artificial construction, Jerusalem has to be the antithesis of that for his argument to hold water.
Well, the primary distinction Dr. Waleed makes is the difference between human construction and divine creation.
Okay.
He refers to the true center in Jerusalem not as something built by human hands, and certainly not as something that requires billions of dollars of imported marble and gold to beautify.
Yet no luxury hotels required to make it holy.
Right. Instead, he defines it as a divine creation, or AO. It is a naturally apparent, naturally blessed land.
He treats it as a geographic fact, rather than an architectural project.
Exactly.
The sanctity is baked into the earth itself, not layered on top of it with endless funding.
His argument is that true sanctity cannot be built. It can only be placed by God. And what is fascinating about his analysis of Jerusalem is how he ties this specific geography to a continuous, unbroken historical timeline of revelation.
How so?
Dr. Waleed claims that Baqqa of Jerusalem is the unchangeable, eternal gathering place of all the prophets. He doesn't allow for a fragmented history where different prophets had different epicenters.
So it's a unified timeline.
Very unified. He specifically traces this lineage from Adam straight through Abraham, all the way to Muhammad. According to Dr. Waleed's reading of history, this specific land features the original authentic sacred mosque, which he explicitly identifies with the Dome of the Rock.
The emphasis he puts on the difference between human-made and divinely placed feels like the absolute linchpin of his logic here.
It absolutely is.
I really want to dig into why that distinction is so critical to everything he writes. It seems to me that he is arguing a point of almost like theological physics.
Theological physics, I like that.
Yeah, like humans simply lack the capacity to construct a holy site. You cannot pour concrete, erect a structure, throw $1 billion at the lighting design, and just declare the space sacred.
No, you can't force it.
Right. Humans can only recognize, submit to, and orient themselves toward what was already deemed sacred by higher power.
You have hit on the exact core of his logic. By aggressively categorizing the desert location as an industrial house built by massive investments, Dr. Waleed is fundamentally stripping it of all divine authority.
He's pulling the rug out.
Exactly. He is telling his reader, look at the endless construction cranes, look at the money, look at the artificial cooling systems that is human effort straining to create an illusion. That is not divine placement. The divine placement, he argues, has always been the naturally blessed, historically consistent land of Jerusalem. Doesn't need to be propped up by a tourism economy because its spiritual gravity is inherent.
Okay, I am definitely tracking with the architecture of his argument so far. We have the artificial, expensive desert center on one side and the natural, historically continuous center in Jerusalem on the other.
Right.
But, if we are adopting his viewpoint for a moment, an enormous, glaring question arises.
I think I know where you're going.
If the true center is this naturally divine place in Jerusalem, and the desert center is a glaringly artificial construction, how in the world did everyone get so lost?
Yeah, it's the elephant in the room.
How do you divert the spiritual orientation of literally millions of people?
Well, Dr. Waleed anticipates that exact question. He doesn't just wave it away as a simple misunderstanding or like a slight cartographical error that got completely out of hand over the centuries.
He has a specific explanation for it.
He does. He connects this massive diversion to ancient historical practices, categorizing it as part of what he explicitly terms a satanic ideology.
A satanic ideology. Okay, he really isn't pulling punches here.
Not at all.
He views this as a deliberate, malignant deception.
He views it as the ultimate corruption of truth. To him, it's a direct continuation of ancient pagan traditions that were specifically designed to sever humanity from divine guidance.
Wow.
He goes back deep into history to map out how this kind of geographical deception has happened before. For instance, he draws a very provocative connection between the current practices in the desert and the people of Noah's time in what he calls Petra of Mecca.
Okay, I have to stop you right there because that is a massive historical claim. The Petra of Mecca connection to the time of Noah.
It's huge, yeah.
What exactly is Dr. Waleed arguing there? Because traditional timelines don't usually map those elements together in that way, do they?
No, they don't. In Dr. Waleed's framework, he is arguing that the geographical region of Petra, which he links conceptually and historically to the current practices in Mecca, has a long lineage of serving as an alternative pagan epicenter.
Oh, I see.
By connecting it to the time of Noah, which is a time traditionally associated with profound global corruption and a departure from divine truth, he is asserting that the impulse to create false, human-made centers of worship is an ancient, recurring human failure.
A pattern.
Exactly, a pattern. He is saying, look, this isn't a new mistake. The people of Noah built monuments to their own arrogance and ignored the true divine reality. And what is happening in the desert today is simply the modern iteration of that exact same ancient error.
He is basically establishing a historical precedent for mass deception.
Right.
He is arguing that humanity has a solid track record of falling for these elaborate artificial constructs.
A very long track record, yes.
And to further prove that the rituals in the desert are rooted in this ancient alternative ideology, he draws another parallel that I found absolutely staggering when I was reading through his text.
The tefillin.
Yes. He makes a direct comparison to the ancient Israelite practice of wearing tefillin. Let's really unpack this because the visual geometry he points out here is just wild.
The tefillin analogy is honestly one of the most striking and specific comparisons Dr. Waleed makes in the entire text.
For sure.
For listeners who might not be familiar, tefillin are small black leather boxes containing scrolls of parchment inscribed with verses from the Torah.
Right.
They are traditionally worn by observant adult Jews during weekday morning prayers, but Dr. Waleed describes them very specifically in his text. He focuses on the fact that they are black cubes worn on the head and the left arm, and they are secured to the body with exactly 7 leather wraps.
Black cubes.
Yeah.
Wrapped exactly 7 times. I think everyone listening can immediately see where Dr. Waleed is going with this. He is looking at the massive black cube in the center of the desert, and he is looking at the ritual of millions of people circumambulating it, walking around it exactly 7 times.
Yes, exactly. Dr. Waleed is drawing a direct visual and conceptual line between these two practices.
It's hard to unsee once he points it out.
He likens the small black cube worn on the individual body, bound by 7 leather wraps, to the massive black cube in the desert, bound by the swirling mass of humanity wrapping around it 7 times.
It's almost fractal. Like the micro practice of the small cube on the arm completely mirrors the macro practice of the giant cube in the desert.
In Dr. Waleed's analysis, absolutely yes. He argues that circling this massive desert cube is essentially a continuation or a physical manifestation of this older methodology.
Okay, I follow the logic.
To him, it is proof that the rituals performed at the artificial center are not divinely ordained original practices. Rather, they are imported, distorted remnants of older traditions that have been co-opted to serve this epistemological idol.
But let me push back on this a bit on behalf of the listener, because there is still a massive psychological gap here.
Sure, lay it out.
Dr. Waleed states that the divine words and laws are unchangeable. That is his foundational premise. God's truth does not shift.
Right.
But if that is true, and if Jerusalem is so obviously the true center, how does he explain the sheer volume of people who believe otherwise?
The millions of people.
Yeah. We aren't talking about a small fringe cult here. We are talking about millions upon millions of people who dedicate their lives, their life savings, and their daily routines to the desert center.
It's a huge commitment.
How do you convince an entire global population to look at the wrong map? The sunk cost fallacy here is almost too massive to comprehend.
It is the ultimate question of his thesis, really. And Dr. Waleed's answer delves deeply into the psychology of mass belief and spiritual condition.
It was a psychological answer.
Very much so. He doesn't just blame a few deceptive architects or kings. He asserts that the masses are actively deceiving themselves.
Okay.
He argues that people haven't merely been tricked by a clever sleight of hand. Rather, they have internally lost their spiritual compass.
So he places the responsibility inward. It is an internal failure of the masses to recognize the truth, not just the success of an external lie.
Exactly. Dr. Waleed describes this mass phenomenon as because of the nature of self-deception. When a person invests their life savings, travels across the globe, and pours their deepest emotional energy into a space, they desperately need that space to be authentic.
Oh, absolutely. They need it to be real.
According to Dr. Waleed, the harder these masses try to find spiritual fulfillment in a fake, human-made center, the more lost they become.
Because the fulfillment isn't actually there.
Right. They perform these exhausting rituals thinking they are fulfilling divine mandates, but in reality, they're only deepening their own delusion. They are feeding that dizziness of ignorance we talked about.
Wow.
They believe they are demonstrating ultimate devotion to God. But Dr. Waleed argues they are merely demonstrating devotion to the architecture of their own deception.
To put a finer point on it, it is not just like wandering in the desert looking for water and finding a mirage.
No, it's darker than that.
It is much worse than that. It is finding a mirage, walking up to a literal pile of dry sand, and because you have spent your whole life walking there, you fall to your knees and start drinking the sand.
Yes.
And every time the sand cuts your throat, you convince yourself that the pain is just part of the spiritual purification process.
That's a great way to put it.
You convince yourself it is water because the alternative, admitting that you walked in the wrong direction for your entire life and that your map is a lie, is just psychologically shattering.
That is a harsh but incredibly precise way to understand Dr. Waleed's psychological critique. The cost of waking up is just too high, so they keep drinking the sand.
Man.
And the longer you drink the sand, the sicker the disease of the heart becomes until your capacity to recognize real water is completely destroyed.
Now, to prove these massive claims, the geographical shift, the historical deception, the psychological self-sabotage, Dr. Waleed knows he cannot just rely on historical parallels or economic critiques, right?
Right, he needs more than that.
He has to go to the source code. He turns to one of the most foundational, universally recognized texts in Islam, Surah Al-Baqarah, specifically the first 25 verses.
Yes, the text itself.
But he doesn't read it the way anyone else reads it. He applies a radically different, intensely geographical lens to it.
This is where Dr. Waleed's research becomes an intricate piece of textual engineering. He takes these opening verses of Surah Al-Baqarah, verses that have been analyzed for centuries, and he uses them to construct a rigid matrix.
A matrix.
Yeah. He categorizes the entirety of humanity into 3 distinct groups, and he bases these categories purely on their geographical alignment on where their internal and external compass is pointing.
This is a massive shift. Usually righteousness in religious texts is defined by, moral actions, belief in doctrine, charity, prayer.
Things you do.
But Dr. Waleed is saying, no, let's look at the map. Your geography dictates your category. Let's break down this matrix. What is this first category?
The first category Dr. Waleed identifies in the text is the righteous, referred to in Arabic as al-mutaqwan.
And how exactly does he define the righteous through his specific geographical lens?
For Dr. Waleed, the righteous are defined by two key factors. They believe in the unseen, and crucially, they physically and spiritually face the true Qibla, the true direction of prayer.
Okay.
And he identifies this true direction exclusively as the Baka of Jerusalem. Because they are aligned with the authentic divine center, they're not caught in the delusion. They see the map clearly.
They aren't drinking the sand.
Exactly. Therefore, he states, based on his reading of the verses, they are the successful ones. They are the ones who will ultimately inherit the earth because they are grounded in reality, not a mirage.
Okay, so category 1, the righteous. Their compass points to Jerusalem. They are tuned in. What is his second category?
The second category is the hypocrites, or al-munafiqun. These are the people we were just discussing when we talked about self-deception and the disease of the heart.
The ones drinking the sand.
Exactly. Dr. Waleed argues that the hypocrites in Surah al-Baqarah are those who deceive themselves by constantly circling the industrial house in the desert. They verbally claim belief, they perform the outward physical motions of extreme devotion, but their geographical orientation betrays them.
It gives them away.
Right.
Yeah.
By aligning themselves with an artificial construct, an epistemological idol, Dr. Waleed argues that their actions actively mock the truth. They're the ones permanently caught in the dizziness of ignorance, performing a pantomime of faith around a human-made cube.
It is a devastating critique. He is saying that the sheer act of participating in the artificial center, no matter how sincere the individual might personally feel, categorizes them as a hypocrite because they have traded divine truth for human architecture.
That's his reading of it, yes.
And that brings us to his third category.
The third category is the disbelievers, or al-kafirun. These are the individuals Dr. Waleed describes as being completely engulfed by the delusion.
Completely lost.
Entirely lost to geographic idols, following the satanic ideology without question. They are so disconnected from any divine truth that they have lost all capacity to perceive it.
And this is where he introduces the title phrase of his entire research text. He calls them deaf, dumb, and blind.
Yes.
But he doesn't just use those words as generic insults, does he?
No, it's much more technical than that.
He introduces a fascinating concept to explain why they are deaf, dumb, and blind. When he analyzes the Quranic verse that speaks of God placing a seal on the hearts and the hearing of the disbelievers, he completely rejects the idea that this is just a poetic metaphor for stubbornness.
Right.
Calls the seal frequency isolation.
Frequency isolation is arguably the most compelling and honestly modern conceptual tool Dr. Waleed deploys in his text.
It sounds like a term from radio engineering or quantum physics.
Yeah.
How does he apply frequency isolation to religious geography?
Well, think of the human soul as a receiver, exactly like a radio antenna.
Okay.
Dr. Waleed postulates that divine truth is a literal signal, a constant living frequency that emits continuously from the true divine center, Jerusalem.
Okay, I am visualizing this. Jerusalem is a broadcasting tower of divine reality.
Yes, exactly. Now, what happens when people shift their focus? When they change their physical qibla, when they turn their bodies, their minds, and their reverence away from Jerusalem and point themselves toward the artificial center in the desert, they are essentially turning the dial on their internal radio.
They're turning away from the signal.
They are tuning their antenna away from the broadcasting tower. By orienting themselves toward a human-made idol, they enforce a state of frequency isolation upon themselves.
That is such a brilliant way to frame it.
Yeah.
So it isn't that God arbitrarily struck them deaf. It is that they willingly pointed their receiver at a dead channel.
Exactly.
They literally cannot hear the truth anymore because their antenna is pointed in the wrong direction. The signal from Jerusalem is still broadcasting, but they have tuned it out.
That is precisely his argument. And Dr. Waleed asks a very pointed question. If they are cut off from the true divine revelation, if their radio is tuned to the desert, what do they hear instead? Because nature abhors a vacuum, they have to hear something.
What does he say they hear?
He says they only hear the lowing of the calf.
Oh, wow. The lowing of the calf. That is an unmistakable reference to the story of the Israelites in the desert, worshiping the golden calf while Moses was away.
Yes, Dr. Waleed is drawing that exact parallel. Because they have tuned out the divine frequency, They only pick up the static of idolatry.
Static of idolatry.
And what do they see? He says they only see deaf stones. They are physically interacting with marble, concrete, and black rock in a desert. They are touching dead matter, completely isolated from the vibrant, living, communicative frequency of truth that emits from Baka of Jerusalem.
Lowing of the calf and deaf stones. He is relentless with these metaphors. He is explicitly stating that the millions of people performing rituals around the desert cube are doing nothing fundamentally different than worshiping the golden calf.
Right.
They are interacting with expensive rocks instead of tuning into the divine signal.
And Dr. Waleed doesn't stop with just the frequency isolation concept. To further illustrate the stark, almost violent clash between the artificial desert center and the profound truth of Jerusalem, he dives into the parables contained within Surah al-Baqarah.
He keeps going deeper into the text.
Yes, he uses these ancient stories to highlight his modern geographic revelation.
Let's really get into those parables, because if you are listening and trying to understand how someone deconstructs a text this thoroughly, this is the masterclass.
It really is a masterclass in reinterpretation.
There are two major metaphors he focuses on from the verses. The first is what he calls the parable of the kindled fire. The text talks about a man who kindles a fire, and just when it illuminates his surroundings, God takes away their light and leaves them in total darkness, unable to see.
Right, that's verse 17.
Now, traditionally, that is read as a metaphor for hypocrites who find a little bit of faith but ultimately lose it. How in the world does Dr. Waleed read that through his geographical lens?
He reads verse 17 of Surah al-Baqarah as a direct, almost literal critique of the massive economy surrounding the desert center.
An economic critique hidden in the parable.
Yes. In Dr. Waleed's interpretation, the man who kindles a fire represents the monumental human effort, the engineering, and the billions upon billions of dollars spent to artificially illuminate and beautify the desert cube and its surrounding mosques.
So the fire isn't a campfire. The fire is the electricity grid. The fire is the massive floodlights, the gold-threaded tapestries, the gleaming marble floors that reflect the sun.
Exactly.
He is saying all of that wealth, all of that infrastructure is the kindled fire.
Exactly. He refers to it as a stolen light or an artificial glow. It is the dazzling spectacle of a manufactured idol designed to awe the human senses and perpetuate the dizziness of ignorance.
It's just a show.
They have built a fire so bright it literally blinds people to the fact that they are standing in a barren desert.
But the parable doesn't end with the fire burning brightly. The text says that God takes away their light and leaves them in darkness. How does Dr. Waleed interpret that sudden blackout?
Well, Dr. Waleed argues that the light God takes away is not the physical electricity, obviously. The lights in the desert are still on. The light that is stripped away is the true light, the spiritual illumination, the divine guidance that can only originate from the true center of Jerusalem.
So you have millions of people standing under the brightest, most expensive floodlights on earth, surrounded by gleaming white marble, but because their compass is broken, spiritually, they're standing in pitch blackness.
That is the exact paradox he is highlighting. He says they are left in the profound darkness of intellectual paganism.
Intellectual paganism.
Yes. They have traded genuine divine light for an artificial billion-dollar glare. And because they stare so intently into that artificial glare, they become literally deaf, dumb, and blind to the true sanctuary. They cannot see Jerusalem because they are blinded by the artificial fire of the desert.
That brings us to the second parable he analyzes. And this one is much more violent, much more turbulent.
The rainstorm.
Yes, the parable of the rainstorm from the sky. Verse 20 talks about a massive storm filled with darkness, thunder, and lightning. The text describes people who are so terrified by the thunderclaps that they thrust their fingers into their ears to block out the sound, fearing death. It's a scene of sheer panic.
Right.
Dr. Waleed likens this storm to what he calls informational power and rhetorical provocation.
This is where Dr. Waleed's text becomes almost self-referential.
That was exactly my thought when I read it. It sounds like he is saying his own research, this massive disruptive thesis we are discussing right now, is the lightning strike.
If we look at the overarching mission of his work, that is precisely what he is implying.
Wow.
Dr. Waleed views the revelation of this geographical truth, the sudden, undeniable assertion that Jerusalem, not the desert, is the true center, as a massive shock to the global system. It is not a gentle breeze of new information. It is a violent thunderstorm. It threatens to upend everything.
So his text is the lightning. When the lightning flashes in the parable, what happens?
The verse says that whenever the lightning flashes, people walk a little in its light. Dr. Waleed interprets this to mean that when the truth of Jerusalem is revealed, when his lightning strikes through the darkness of their assumed knowledge, people experience a moment of clarity.
A sudden realization.
Right. For a brief second, they can see the true landscape. The logic makes sense to them. They recognize the historical continuity of the prophets in Jerusalem. They recognize the artificiality of the desert. They take a hesitant step toward the truth.
But the lightning is just a flash. It doesn't last. And the parable says, when it darkens on them, they stand still.
Right. When the brief, shocking flash of truth fades, the crushing weight of their reality returns. They are suddenly faced with the immense, terrifying implications of what that truth means.
It's too much.
If the desert is fake, then generations of their ancestors were wrong. Their investments are void. Their daily rituals are misdirected. The darkness of their entrenched beliefs and their societal conditioning returns, and they are paralyzed. They stand still.
And what about the thunder? Why are they putting their fingers in their ears?
The thunder represents the disruptive, shattering power of this new, paradigm-shifting information. The cognitive dissonance is so incredibly loud, so deeply uncomfortable, that they cannot bear to listen.
They just shut down.
They put their fingers in their ears. They prefer the safety of their artificial, constructed reality over the terrifying disruption of the truth. They are terrified to abandon their established norms, even when confronted with evidence that those norms are part of a desert delusion.
If you're listening to this, just think about how profoundly true that psychological assessment is, regardless of the topic.
Oh, absolutely.
People would rather stand perfectly still in the pitch black with their hands clamped over their ears than attempt to navigate by a new, terrifyingly disruptive light. It is a stunning analysis of human nature when confronted with information that threatens their core identity.
It is a profound psychological observation, and what makes Dr. Waleed's work so comprehensive is that after he lays out the historical context, dissects the psychological self-deception, and completely re-engineers the scriptural parables, he doesn't just leave his argument hovering in the realm of theory or textual interpretation.
Right, he grounds it.
He understands that if he is arguing about geography, he must provide physical, earthly proof. He concludes his research with very specific, unchangeable geographical markers to permanently cement his claim.
Right. He grounds this massive theoretical argument back into the literal dirt and stone of the earth. What are the final markers he points to? How does he physically prove Jerusalem is the center?
He highlights two massive, undeniably specific geographical landmarks that exist in the region of Palestine, which he uses to lock in his thesis. First, he refers to a concept he calls the earth with a rift.
The earth with a rift.
Through his analysis, he identifies this rift as the sacred valley of Tuwa, which he directly correlates with the geological formation of the Dead Sea area.
The Dead Sea.
Yeah.
You cannot get a more literal rift in the earth than the Dead Sea.
No, you really can't.
It is the lowest elevation on land. It is a massive, gaping geological anomaly.
Exactly. And his second physical marker is what he calls the sky with a return. He identifies this with the concept of the covered tree, acting as a natural cosmic canopy over the true sacred region.
Okay.
Dr. Waleed uses these massive, natural, unchangeable markers, a literal tectonic rift in the earth, a natural canopy in the sky, to deliver his final, devastating contrast against the desert center.
I see the checkmate he is playing here. These are geological features. They are facts of the earth. You cannot build the Dead Sea. No matter how much money a kingdom has, no matter how many architects they hire, you cannot manufacture a tectonic rift.
Precisely. His argument reaches its apex here. He states that these unchangeable, divinely placed geological features are the ultimate, undeniable proof that the region of Palestine, with the Baka of Jerusalem at its heart, is the authentic, original center of blessing meant to guide the world.
Not a human construction.
Exactly. The desert has a cube made of concrete and cloth. Jerusalem has the very architecture of the earth, testifying to its sanctity.
So we have unpacked the critique, the history, the psychology, the scripture, and the geology. What does this all culminate in? What is Dr. Waleed's ultimate conclusion? Where does he leave the reader who has just had their entire geographical worldview dismantled?
His conclusion is not merely an academic summary. It is a passionate, direct call to action. He urges his readers and humanity at large to stop trading guidance for misguidance. He wants them to remember his economic and spiritual critique. Investing your soul, your time, and your wealth into the artificial desert center is a losing trade. He demands a complete, unequivocal return.
A physical and spiritual return.
Both. He calls for a physical reorientation of the Qibla, literally turning one's body away from the desert and back toward Bakkah of Jerusalem, and a spiritual realignment with the unbroken lineage of the prophets.
The total reset.
In his view, this is the only possible way to cure the disease of the heart. It is the only way to escape the self-imposed state of being deaf, dumb, and blind. It is the only way to tune the radio dial back to the divine frequency.
He wants people to quite literally turn around. And this brings us to a concept that I think summarizes the sheer weight of this entire text. You mentioned this in your notes before we started, and I think we need to spend a moment on it. The concept of geographical epistemology.
Yes. If you take away one philosophical framework from Dr. Waleed's work, it really should be geographical epistemology.
Let's dive into that.
As you defined earlier, epistemology is how we know what we know. Dr. Waleed's entire thesis is built on the premise that our geography dictates our knowledge.
Dictates it.
Yes. Where we physically look, where we orient our bodies, our architecture, and our ultimate reverence fundamentally determines the limits of what we are capable of understanding.
It's like linguistic relativity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the idea that the language you speak shapes how you perceive reality, but applied to a map.
That is an excellent comparison, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at a false center, if you build your society around an epistemological idol, then your entire resulting system of knowledge, your theology, your history, your understanding of the divine becomes inherently false.
The foundation is rotten.
The foundational premise is corrupted, so the entire structure built upon it is unstable. But if you orient yourself toward the true, divinely placed center, the interference drops away. The frequency becomes clear. Geography, in Dr. Waleed's view, is not just a matter of location or convenience. It is the absolute foundation of truth.
If your compass is fundamentally broken, every single step you take is a step in the wrong direction. It doesn't matter how fast you are walking. It doesn't matter how sincere you are. It doesn't matter if you bought billion-dollar hiking boots. You are still walking into a mirage.
That is the uncompromising reality of his thesis.
Wow. Okay, if you are listening to this, take a deep breath. We have covered an absolutely massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
Let's do a quick synthesis of this deep dive into Dr. Khaled Waleed's staggering text, Deaf, Dumb, and Blind, the Desert Delusion. We began with his core, explosive assertion that the universally recognized center of worship in the desert is not a place of divine revelation, but rather a highly profitable, human-made illusion.
An industrial house generating billions off the dizziness of ignorance.
Exactly. From there, we mapped out his historical argument, tracing how he connects the authentic lineage of all prophets strictly to the natural, unchangeable Bakkah of Jerusalem.
Right, and we examined how he views the rituals in the desert not as divine mandates, but as imported pagan practices.
Right, likening the circumambulation of the giant black cube to the ancient practice of wearing tefillin.
We then dove deep into his radical geographical rereading of Surah al-Baqarah. We looked at his matrix of humanity, how he defines righteousness purely by orientation toward Jerusalem, and hypocrisy as self-deception in the desert.
We explored the brilliant concept of frequency isolation, where turning away from Jerusalem literally tunes out the divine signal, leaving the masses listening to the lowing of the calf and interacting with deaf stones.
And finally, we discussed his powerful reinterpretation of the parables, the blinding, artificial, stolen light of the billion-dollar kindled fire, contrasted with the terrifying lightning storm of his own disruptive research.
All of this anchored by unchangeable earthly markers, the rift of the Dead Sea and the canopy of the sky, culminating in his urgent call for humanity to physically and spiritually return to the true center.
It is without a doubt one of the most intense, systematic deconstructions of a global paradigm I have ever read. It is a lot to process.
It is an immense amount to process. But I want to put this entirely back to you, the listener. Regardless of your personal background, regardless of your religious affiliation, and regardless of whether you agree or disagree with the specific geographical conclusions Dr. Waleed presents, his text serves as a profound, almost unparalleled case study.
A case study in what, specifically?
A case study in the power of narrative and the fragility of perceived reality. It is a masterclass in seeing how deeply entrenched geographical and historical narratives shape the consciousness of billions of people.
It really is.
It demonstrates with terrifying clarity how a single text, simply by applying a different, meticulously argued lens, can be used to entirely deconstruct a multi-billion-dollar, universally accepted reality. It forces all of us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question.
Which is?
In our own lives and our own belief systems, how much of what we accept as fundamental, unquestionable truth is actually based on authentic foundations, and how much is merely based on human construction, financial investment, and the sheer momentum of history.
What are our own epistemological idols? What are the false norths on our own compasses? That is a heavy, heavy thought to carry.
It genuinely makes you want to pull out every map you've ever been handed and check the coordinates.
Yeah.
And that brings me to a final thought, a final question I want to leave you with today as we wrap up this deep dive. Something for you to mull over long after this audio stops playing.
Lay it on us.
It is inspired directly by Dr. Waleed's powerful metaphor of the lightning storm. We spent a lot of time discussing how radical, paradigm-shifting information strikes exactly like lightning.
Right.
When a piece of information flashes out of the dark, completely illuminating the landscape and threatening to absolutely upend a foundational belief that is held by millions of people, what is our natural response?
That's the real question.
Is human nature actually wired to bravely follow that brief, terrifying flash of light out of the familiar territory and into the unknown? Or is our deepest, most primal survival instinct always to plug our ears against the deafening thunder, cover our eyes against the blinding glare, and just stand completely stubbornly still in the dark, waiting for the storm to pass so we can go back to sleep?